And we can officially stop with Missouri Tiger playoff talk until proven otherwise. Let's talk about that and more after a disappointing performance right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso, and the central scrutinizer, even on the bad days of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And coming up on today's program, I'm going to have to be brutally honest with Luther Burton. It's time for him to be a better leader of this Missouri football team. But a heck of a lot went wrong today. It's not all on just one person, that's for darn sure. So let's break it all down coming up in the program. First, I want to tell you today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And you know what? If we're just going to get started here, I'm going to just give you all a victory lap. Those of you who want to dunk on me, if that's your goal in life, you know what? Go ahead. I'm going to just take the charge, put on a blindfold. You can take the Nerf ball and just crush it right on my forehead right now because, quite honestly, I deserve it. I was wrong about just about everything in that game except that, well, Texas A&M's defensive line was pretty impressive. I knew that was something to fear, and obviously Missouri having to drop back and throw for most of the ball game was not a recipe for success. And as my dad exited my house this afternoon, he said, well, it wasn't fun, but we watched it. Go Royals. That's about the peak of Missouri optimism right now. And honestly, this was one of the only times I was asking myself in the Eli Drinkwitz era, did Missouri actually quit here in this ball game? Well, I'll just say this. I don't know if they quit, but they definitely didn't respond to adversity well whatsoever. And you could certainly say, hey, the Boston College game, the Vanderbilt games, especially now, I think it's obvious to say that those games were harbingers of bad things. Not as, well, I tried to think, hey, these are fixable little errors here and there. Hey, the red zone can be a little better. That's not what happened in this Texas A&M game. This was alarming on a whole bunch of different levels. Had I seen this the first 4 weeks, well, I had been singing a different tune. Had I been seeing a Missouri defense that couldn't stop anything, the run, the pass. When Connor Wigman started the game, a part of me was a little bit excited. I thought, hey, here's maybe a guy who isn't maybe ready to take the ball yet. Boy, he looked like the opposite of that. Connor Wigman for Texas A&M was excellent in today's ball game. From the very beginning, whenever Missouri played zone coverage against Connor in that Texas A&M passing game, well, the Aggies carved it apart. And then when Missouri played man coverage, well, Wigman would just scramble effectively, usually for a first down. So no matter what Missouri did, and honestly, I don't think Corey Batoon did enough blitzing in this ball game. At a certain point, when man coverage isn't working, when zone coverage isn't working, well, what's left? You might as well just blitz and hope for luck. And that's something I think maybe Missouri could have done a little bit earlier. But arguing about the X's and O's is really missing the point right now. And even arguing about penalties, which I'll talk a little bit about later. Of course, Missouri was on the wrong end of a bunch of penalties, but crying about officiating at this point would be the epitome of loserdom in a 41-10 ball game. I mean, Missouri just, what can you really say other than, especially defensively, the Tigers did not show up? Obviously, a really disappointing game offensively as well, but at least Brady Cook and the Missouri offense had its moments. What were the moments for the Missouri defense? To me, that's maybe the most alarming part of this game of all. The bottom line is, this is a season that started off with playoff aspirations and even borderline expectations in some circles for Missouri. Well, we can just put a stop to that right now officially. And I'm going to stop making excuses for this team as well. And to be fair to me and my takes, this is by far the worst Missouri performance of the season. I think we can all agree with that. And all of my takes about Missouri facing this Texas A&M offense were about Marcel Reed, but that's the coldest comfort I could possibly imagine. The bottom line is Missouri just isn't all that good right now. Missouri 9th in the country in both polls coming into the game. I don't think they're going to actually fall out of the top 25 or anything, although if they did, I think it would be warranted based on what Missouri has done so far. A close victory over Boston College, a team that just lost to Virginia today with Thomas Castellanos back at quarterback. There's just no positive spin right now from this game. I wish I could tell you, well, here's what Missouri did well, and going forward, I'm really optimistic going forward. And hey, technically, of course, if Missouri turns it around and they blow out UMass and somehow pull off an upset in Tuscaloosa, then technically, yeah, absolutely. Playoffs are not only back on the table, but maybe even likely under that scenario. But can any of us see that scenario right now? Not just based on Texas A&M, but now based on retroactively the first 4 weeks of the season here. We'll see how Vanderbilt looks tonight. Speaking of the Crimson Tide, well, they've got the Tide at home tonight. We'll see how the Commodores look as I record this show at about 3 p.m. on Saturday after the Missouri-Texas A&M game. But again, just no positive spin to put on this right now whatsoever. I hate to say it, but that's the cold, harsh reality. Go Royals? So, of course, after wins, after losses, and especially in the offseason, well, we like to talk about the quarterbacks, and I'm no different. That's why I said we in this particular scenario. But I have to say, I think for all the criticisms, and some of them warranted, that Brady Cook is getting after this ball game, he was not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. He had his problems. I also thought, especially in blitz recognition, I thought from Cook, because at times when you're the quarterback, obviously you can set the protection, the center can set the protection, you can account for this blitzer or that blitzer, but at a certain point, some of those blitzers, if they come, well, that's on the responsibility of the quarterback and also the receivers as well to find that hot route, to find the soft spot that is vacated by said blitzers from the second and occasionally the third level of the defense. So when you don't find those, well, I thought that just happened far too often for Missouri. But to be fair to Cook, I thought he did a good job escaping pressure at times, finding guys downfield, including, well, a couple balls to Mookie Cooper that maybe should have been caught for explosive plays late in the game. I still think Missouri should consider playing Josh Manning a little bit more in those spots, maybe somebody else. Marquise Johnson was obviously maybe limited this week. He did play on kickoff coverage, kickoff returns, I should say, but I didn't see him actually playing receiver this week. Maybe somebody can correct me if I'm wrong there. But regardless, seeing Mookie Cooper lining up as a boundary receiver at maybe, 5'7", to be slightly generous perhaps, 170 pounds. Again, if I'm being really generous. Again, I like Mookie Cooper. I just don't think that is the best use of his talents. But regardless, my point is to Brady Cook being pretty much the same guy is that Brady Cook last season, like a lot of quarterbacks, like Carson Beck, as I pointed out this offseason, well, both of them look really good when they're not under pressure. But when they're under pressure, and this is statistically accurate, at least last season, I haven't followed up with these numbers this season so far, but they're about the same guy under pressure, which is significantly less. Let's put it that way. So to me, the protection just hasn't been good enough so far. That's the biggest difference. It's not that Cook's different. It's that we've seen the under pressure version of Cook versus the no pressure version of Cook far too often. When he's got a clean pocket, he's a different guy. I think Missouri really misses Javon Foster right now, the left tackle who is a pillar of that Missouri offensive line for years and years, the entire Eli Drinkwitz era. until this season. To be brutally honest, so far, the portal guys just aren't quite cutting it so far on the left side of that Missouri offensive line, and Brandon Jones has got to continue to coach him up. It's getting early, awfully late right now, as the old saying goes at Missouri. The excuse of, well, it's early September football, well, quite early it's October. It's time to turn the page and get better on that side of the football, or else that Missouri offense is never going to click at the level we all expected to start the season. And in the lead up to this Aggies ball game, Luther Burton was not thrilled with the amount of coverage Missouri was getting. Well, Eli Drinkwitz got a long interview on SEC Nation, as SEC Nation was hosting that ball game on the A&M campus. Burton also got a long interview, a walk and talk on game day as well. Tough to complain about that coverage, and I thought this is really Missouri's moment. And that's how we showed up for it. And when things started going wrong, I gotta say, was not thrilled with the leadership that Burton showed whatsoever. So let's talk about that coming up here in just a little bit. But first, I want to remind you today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And you know what, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a ball game, you can check out the latest stats, live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That is on FanDuel.com, as I just chugged a bunch of water before I did this read. Lesson learned there. But again, Kansas City Chiefs, stop betting on them. That's my big take for the week once again. But regardless of what you're into, you got to visit FanDuel.com. And to point out the obvious, things went wrong for Missouri just from the jump there, and for a lot of different reasons. And ultimately, Texas A&M was just a lot better than the Tigers. That was the #1 reason. So again, no excuses here whatsoever. But I will say that down 24-0, 6:30 left approximately in the second quarter, I was thinking, well, folks, it's time for a Georgia-like comeback against Alabama. But in that moment, here's what you saw. You cut to the sidelines, and here's what our star receiver, Luther Burton, a guy who I boldly predicted would be one of the finalists for the Heisman Trophy. Here's what he was doing as we cut to him on the sidelines. That was basically Luther Burton's body language at that moment. And I got to say, I was trying to be Mr. Optimistic, because that's sort of my nature. And I immediately lost it. Everyone at my party for this game can confirm it. I lost it on Luther Burton, just like one of my listeners a few weeks did after the Boston College game, when Burton got a couple utterly unnecessary personal foul penalties that could have cost Missouri that game. Well, Burton, once again, was frankly selfish, I thought, on the sidelines in that moment. And in a couple more moments later in the half, we're walking into the tunnel. Obviously, things have gone horribly for the Tigers. And Luther Burton loves to dance around and fire everybody up when things are going well. I got to tell you, it's easy to be a front runner. It really is. But when things are going badly, well, that's when we need actual leadership. So I'm sorry, Luther Burton, you're now a junior. You're no longer a young guy. You're an upperclassman. You should know better than this. If you're going to point your finger and wag your finger like the late, great Dikembe Mutombo at the media and say, hey, where's our attention? Well, when stuff starts going bad, I don't want to see you throw your towel over your head as a signal to let everybody know that, hey, it's not my fault. I should have had that 75-yard touchdown. It's Armand Membu's fault. He might as well just pointed his finger at Armand Mimbu, his teammate, who's been blocking for him all season, gets none of the credit, but boy, he sure gets the blame, doesn't he, when something goes wrong. And you know what? Armand messed up on that play. There was a whole bunch of penalties that went against Missouri, especially on that first drive, that fourth down. I loved the aggression by Kirby Moore and Eli Drinkwitz and the Tigers on that, by the way. 4th and 2, we took a play-action shot downfield. I was saying that's something the Tigers need to do. By God, they had the guts to do it, and it should have paid off. It was open. It was the right call by Brady Cook. Weiss got open, and it was a penalty. It should have been called. That's one of the worst calls I've seen in my time watching Missouri football. It was obvious. Missouri got it. That was the thing that was frustrating about it. But the point is, you can't then, okay, when Missouri actually did mess up, as Armand Mimbu, he was 3 yards downfield. He was an ineligible man downfield. As frustrating as that is, and as much as that had no effect on the play, the bottom line is that was the right call. I hate to say it. I really do. That was the right call. So I understand Burton's frustrated. He should be frustrated. But in that moment, he's got to realize, in those moments, when his team is down, and this is the season almost for Missouri. This game was the season. You can't just go, oh, it's all about me now. I'm just going to, give me a towel. Let me throw it on my head. I'm sorry. I'm tired of that. That is selfishness. It's certainly not leadership. It's the antithesis of leadership, Luther. And I love you, man. I really do. Just as a fan. I don't know you, but just as a Missouri fan, I love you as a player. Always have. I've defended you. I've even defended you after the BC penalties. I thought, this is out of his character. This is something he's going to do better at and clean up. But man, you're a junior. When things are going bad, it's not about you. I'm sorry. If that sounds harsh, I'm sure there's going to be a bunch of people that are going to dunk on me for this too. Go right ahead. I'll Dikembe right back at you because deep down, you know I'm right. Luther Burton can't just be about himself in these moments. I'm sorry. It's about leadership. You're the best player on the team. You're the most talented guy on the team. You're going to go on to make millions of dollars in the NFL. You've already made a bunch of money in NIL from Missouri too, and good for you. I'm happy for you. I think you're a good person. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying Luther Burton's a bad guy or anything. I'm not going crazy. I'm not even saying I know the guy. I'm just saying those moments of just horrendous body language. By the way, I wasn't the only one who pointed it out. Jordan Rogers pointed it out on the broadcast too. I'm sorry. It's easy to be a leader when things are going well, but when things are going bad, that's when you're really tested in terms of leadership. Push through. It's easy to pout. It's easy to be a front runner when things are going well. And by the way, I won't just put it on Luther either. The coaches need to do a better job of that kind of thing too. They need to make sure that, hey, if they see Luther, if they see him in the pout position on the bench, somebody needs to get him up. Jacob Peeler, get over there. Get his butt up and say, hey, come on, what are we doing here? Did you guys just see the Alabama-Georgia game? Wake up. You know, that's one of the things that disappointed me today. Obviously, I'm fired up right now, but I think all Missouri fans are fired up, and they should be. This was such a special, special moment. I'm telling you, before this season kicked off, the Murray State game, I've never felt a buzz like that before a season in my life. And to just have a no-show like this, it's such a massive missed opportunity. And of course, technically, hey, everything's still out in front of Missouri right now. They could win the rest of their games, make the college football playoff, win the SEC. Prove me wrong, by all means. The problem is, at this point, there's just absolutely no reason whatsoever through 5 weeks to think that's going to happen, especially after what was kind of a no-show against Texas A&M. Complain about the penalties all you want. A heck of a lot of those were self-inflicted. And despite the supposed pregame bulletin board talk that Mike Elko jumped on via Brady Cook, I honestly don't think the crowd noise was a factor at all. I'm not saying, listen, I'm sure Kyle Field was hopping this morning. I have no doubt about that. It's a loud crowd. I just don't think that was why Missouri, laid the egg that it did, quite honestly. I think they just look like a different team this week with Connor Weigman. So let's talk more about this Missouri game, including, yes, the blanket coming up in just a little bit. But next, we got to talk about Game Time, because this time of year, it's all about outdoor events, from college football to outdoor concerts, the whole deal. Well, Game Time is absolutely the place you need to check out for all of your last-minute tickets to sports, concerts, pro wrestling, whatever you're into. Heck, even Monday Night Football, the Chiefs against the Saints at Arrowhead Stadium. It's not going to be cheap, I'm going to be honest with you, but you can always get your all-in pricing, so at least you don't get that sticker shock. Just toggle all-in pricing so you get the fees and everything else, so you know exactly what you're paying before you check out. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. And again, while the list of things that I got wrong in predicting and talking about this Missouri game were quite long, let's be real. Of course, yes, Marcel Reed, well, man, it looked a little different. That's for darn sure with him at quarterback, to be fair to myself. But yes, I'm going to take a lot of L's this week. But I think the one thing I got right was that, man, in an ideal world, Missouri would have been able to run the football a heck of a lot more. Now, you look at the box score, Nate Noel with 10 carries for 30 yards, Marcus Carroll 8 for 26. Those numbers are not going to blow you away whatsoever, but oddly enough, I thought when Missouri was kind of in garbage and catch-up time, when you'd think, well, A&M, they're just going to be pinning their ears back and trying to rush the passer. Well, the Aggies did a heck of a job of defending those Missouri handoffs to the running backs and, well, kind of stuffed what I thought was a relatively effective Missouri running game at times in the first half. The problem was Missouri just didn't have enough opportunities to hand the ball off, and, well, arguably, maybe they should have handed the ball off a little bit more, but again, when you're down 17-0, then suddenly it's 24, then it's 31. It's hard to argue, yeah, guys, just keep handing it off over and over again. That's the ticket to a comeback. So, again, play selection there. It's hard to argue that Missouri should have run the ball more, but what Missouri really needed was that long 75-yard touchdown pass to count. They needed that, obviously, that pass interference play on the first drive. They needed that they needed to cash in at least 3 or 7 there, and at least it would have been interesting to see what happens there. But again, the problem is, even when you talk yourself into a Kentucky last season, a 2023 Kentucky-like comeback for the Tigers, the problem is defensively, they just never showed any signs whatsoever of stopping Texas A&M. That's really the most alarming part of all of this, is we had already known, well, the Missouri offense was maybe not quite clicking how we wanted to. I thought the Missouri defense was looking very strong, except for some explosive plays given up here or there. Again, that was not the case today. It was really quite the opposite. There were some occasional explosive plays by A&M that were really the result of excellent throws by Weigman and some really, really good catches downfield by A&M. I'll give them some credit. But really, I'll give them even more credit for just constantly and methodically murder balling Missouri to death by just moving the chains over and over again. They just controlled the game the entire way, and I'll say that's probably the thing I got the most wrong by far. Obviously, I picked Missouri 20-7. The 7, now that's what I really got wrong. Holy moly. They had that in the first drive of the game, obviously. 41 points for the Aggies. Corey Batoon and the Tigers, they got to take a long look in the mirror right now and figure out what the heck went wrong, because that was a really shocking result, in my opinion. And finally, maybe this is just me as a South Park fan, but did anybody else, when they kept telling the story of the Texas A&M cornerback supposedly giving Theo Weiss a symbolic blanket, as if, hey, I'm going to blanket you in coverage all day, buddy? Well, every time they brought that up multiple times in the broadcast, I kept thinking of the South Park episode where they did the Michael Jackson parody, Mr. Jefferson. Remember that episode? And he kept going, blanket, oh, blanket. Did anybody else think of that? I don't know. That was just me. But regardless, I just wanted to go out on a little bit of a light note there, since this was a heavy game, a heavy blanket on top of my face, if you will. In fact, that blanket tried to suffocate me. That game was such a bummer. But you know what? Thanks for joining me despite the negativity and bummerness of this particular football game. But you know what? I'm going to be back next week with more Missouri football regardless. So hope you join me next time right here on Locked On Mizzou.